Namaste, dear friends. Namaste, and welcome to our Viniyoga Unplugged meeting of the 30th of May, 2025. Very nice to see you all. Let's begin with our invocation chanting. Oh. शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये यस्य द्विरदवक्त्राद्याः पारिषद्या परशतं विघ्नन्ति सततं विश्वक्सेनन्तमाश्रये ज्ञानानन्दमयं देवं निर्मलस्फटिकाकृतिम् आधारं सर्वविद्यानां हयग्रीवमुपास्महे पुण्डरीकासनासीनं पाण्डुराभ्रेन्दुसन्निभम् अखण्डबोधजनकं हयग्रीवमुपास्महे गुरुभ्यस्तद्गुरुभ्यश्च नमो वाकमधीमहे वृणीमहे च तद्राद्यो दम्पती जगतां पति श्रीनगर्यां महापुर्यां ताम्रपर्ण्योत्तरे तटे श्रीतिन्त्रिणी मूलधाम्ने षठकोपाय मङ्गलम् नीलातुङ्गस्तनगिरितटे सुप्तमुद्बोध्य कृष्णं पारार्थ्यं स्वं श्रुतिशतशिरश्चिद्यमध्यापयन्ति स्वच्छिष्टायां सृजनिगलितया बलात्कृत्य भुङ्क्ते गोदा तस्यै नम इदमिदं भूय एवास्तु भूयः जयतु नाथो न्यायतत्त्वप्रणीता जयतु योगी योगगुह्यप्रवक्ता जयतु साक्षात् तत्त्वदर्शी महर्षिः जयतु भक्तेर्मूलकन्दं मुनीन्द्रः स्वाधयन्निह सर्वेषां त्रय्यन्तार्थं सुदुर्ग्रहं स्तोत्रायामास योगीन्द्रः तं वन्दे यामुनक्वयम् यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मा व्यामोहितस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये श्रीमान् वेङ्कटनाथार्य कवितार्किककेसरी वेदान्ताचार्यवर्यो मे सन्निधत्तां सदा हृदि श्रीकृष्ण ब्रह्मतन्त्रोत्तम गुरु करुणावप्तचक्रङ्क भाष्यं वैराग्याचारवार्धौ वरद पदमुखे लक्ष्मणे न्यस्तभारम् श्रीवागीशात्ततुर्यं शठ रिपु यतिराट् वेदचूडार्यमूर्तिं नोत्नं श्रीरङ्गनाथं कलिरिपुमनघं Brahmatantram Shrayamaha. Shrimannutanaranganatha Yatirad Aptatma Vidyalayam Shrimannutana Lakshmanarya Yatirad Samprapta Thuryashramam Shri Vasendra Kataksha Santata Sudha Lakshatma Yogaschitam Shrimannutana Vagadhisha Yaminam Bhaktya Shrayamo Gurum Shri Krishna Vagesha Yateshwarabhyam Samprapta Chakrankana Bhashyasaram Shrinot Narangendra Yatau Samarpitaswam Shri Krishna Maryam Guruvaryamide Virodhi Kartike Mase Shatatara Kritodayam Yogacharyam Krishna Maryam Guruvaryamaham Bhaje Shishyakam Krishna Maryasya Nathavamsha Pradepakam Kalyana Gunarupantam Shri Deshikan Namamyaham Prashanta Purushakaram Viniyoga Pracharakam Vishesha Vaidikam Surim Tandeshikam Smaramyaham Lakshminatha Samarambham Nathayamuna Madhyamam Asmad Acharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Yastyaktvā rūpamadhyam prabhavati jagato nekadhanugrahaya Prakshina klesha rashir vishama vishadharo nekavaktra subhogi Sarvajnana prasutir bhujaga parikara pritaye yasya nityam Devo hishasavo vyat sita vimalatanur yogado yoga yuktaha Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi abahu purushakaram shankha chakrasidharinam sahasra shirasam shvetam pranamami patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Patanjala Mahabhashya Charaka Pratisamskritaihi Manovakkaya Doshanam Hatre Ahipataye Namaha Bhashya Krit Sutra Krit Chape Nirmalantam Sorupinam Dhyataram Shripater Nityam Patanjalin Namamyaham Om Manibhrajat Phanasasravidruta Vishwambhara Mandalaya Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Om Shanti 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 Namaste, dear friends. Namaste, and welcome to our 17th meeting, actually. That's phenomenal. We've been continuing quite a bit in these past 1.5 years. So, today we are going to discuss a very interesting and very important topic of yoga, principle of yoga, that is called VAIRÁGYA. VAIRÁGYA comes from the derivation Vigataha Ragaha Vairagyam. The concept of letting go or detachment, or sometimes translated in a very old-fashioned way as dispassion, because raga means passion, and therefore vairagya, which is the opposite of raga, is often translated as dispassion. So, but more importantly, the concept of Vairagya is something like a letting go process of the things where we let go the attachment that we have to different things. And in the view of Maharishi Patanjali, the idea that Vairagyam is idea of Vairagyam is very, very central to yoga philosophy, especially from the very beginning stage as well as till the very end. So when you look at the concept of Vairagyam, it's presented not only in the first chapter, but also in the last chapters. So that's how significant Vairagyam is, because as we proceed in the path, we need to start letting go different kind of things. So what we let go when we are in the beginning of the journey and what we let go when we are toward the end of the journey are quite different. So in the very beginning of the first chapter, towards the very, very beginning, Patanjali defines Vairagyam as part of a team of two, Abhyasa and Vairagya, as two principles that lead us to what is called Chittavritti Nirodha, which is the first goal post of yoga, the goal of yoga, which is to achieve this discipline of the mind. And here Patanjali is saying that we need to have both practice and also we need to have Vairagya, letting go of certain things that are important to help us achieve our goal of stabilizing our mind. What we need to let go here is very different from what we will need to let go in later parts of our process. So let us start with what we need to let go in the beginning. So already in the first part of the process, Patanjali is talking about two different levels of Vairagyam, what is called Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam and Para Vairagyam. Para Vairagyam is the highest Vairagya, which is what we will need when we go to the most advanced stages of our spiritual journey. But in the beginning stage, we need to have somehow a certain amount of lower level Vairagyam, that is what is called Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. But my dear friends, do not be fooled that just because we say that it is a lower level Vairagyam, that this Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam is actually easy to practice or is actually a lower level. It's not the lowest level of Vairagyam. We will come to that in a moment. So Patanjali is saying that the lower level of the two is what is called Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam, which is defined in Sutra 115, Drishta Anushravika Vishaya Vitrishnasya Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. So according to him, there are two types of objects that we are encountering in this world. What is called Drashta Vishaya and the other one is called Anushravika Vishaya. Drashta Vishaya are objects that we can see, we can perceive through our senses, like you have some fruits and vegetables that are so delicious. There's cookies, there's chocolates, there is coffee, there is pizza, all these things that you can see. But it also includes other things like maybe people, you are attracted to somebody, you are attracted to a destination, you like some music, you hear, all these are temptations that we can perceive through the senses, that we can perceive through the senses. That's why the word drishta vishaya is presented, because the word drishta vishaya derives from drishtam yogyam vishayam drishta vishaya, that which can be perceived. So there are so many objects of temptation that are being able to be perceived. When we say perceived, it is not only the eyes, it is including all the what we call external faculties. Bahya Indriya Grakhya Padarthaha. This is what Acharya Krishnamacharya says as objects that we are able to perceive with our external senses, which are the sense of seeing, the sense of hearing, the sense of smelling, the sense of feeling, the sense of tasting, etc. This is what we call as drashta vishaya. Anushravika vishaya is anushruyate iti anushravikam. Those things that we hear about, but we cannot perceive yet. It's not music you can hear, but it's something that people say, but you are not able to perceive it. Like things like, oh, there's a great restaurant in other side of town. No, you can't see that. You can't smell that restaurant. You can't see that yet, but you are hearing about it, right? That is what is called anushravika. Even Vyasa is saying things like Swarga Vaidekya Prakti Layatva Praptihi Anushravika Vishaya. Even things like heaven, things like heaven, we are hearing about it. Hey, there is a heaven above. You will go there when you die. Well, we have not really perceived what is heaven, right? We have not really perceived what is hell, right? Because these are things that we hear about, but we cannot yet see or perceive in through our external senses. So this is what is called anushravika vishaya. Very often I tell people, oh, when I share my story about my family ancestry and the concept of the tamarind tree temple, everybody is like tempted, oh, I want to go there. That's a desire of something that they hear about. I have seen, but not them. So for me, it's a drashta vishaya, but for them it's an anushravika vishaya because I'm talking about it. So for these kind of objects, that whether it is an object that we directly perceive or an object that we hear about, vitrushnasya, we need to have an absence of thirst. Because the thirst is what is the problem. The thirst is what is the problem. Because that thirst will lead us in that direction. Now, what we have to understand here, my dear friends, is not that we do not have any relationship with the object. But what it means here is you are redefining the relationship with the object, and rather than you are pursuing these objects as objects of desire, you relate with the object as objects that serve your dharma. It does not mean don't eat delicious food. It means that don't become a slave of delicious food, but rather use the delicious and healthy food as something that keeps you fit, that nourishes you, so that you can fulfill your dharma. The moment you refine this change, you make this change, you shift this, then there is already a vairagyam. You will not be like tempted by these objects that much. You will just consume what is enough, and your relationship will change. And that is the biggest problem today, because most of modern day marketing targets raga. It's always creating that desire. Oh, if you have this new phone, you will have a happier life. If you have a new car, you will be more happier. If you have this food, you will be more whatever, joyful. If you eat this drug, you will be more slim. If you eat that drug, you will be more handsome, blah, blah, blah. They are targeting the desire. And it's very, very fascinating, because when you look at countries like India, like in my own home country, they sell products which are called fair and lovely. They want you to become more and more white skinned, brighter skinned. But when you go abroad, you see how many people are sold that they should have darker skin, and they are all sold all the heat saunas and all the treatments that make their skin darker. It's exactly what they are doing. They're basically targeting the desire. They're creating a lacking and targeting the desire. That's why the moment you don't have a desire, then you don't pursue that object in the same way. And it works in every case, even things like heaven. We don't need to pursue it as a space of desire. And this is a very, very similar principle as well in the Buddhist philosophy, where there is a very famous saying my father used to tell me. He said that there is a Buddhist saying where it says a monk was searching and searching and searching for enlightenment. And one day he stopped searching and then he found enlightenment. So even the search for enlightenment can become a desire-based concept, because that's an anushravika vishaya. People tell you, oh, you should be enlightened, then you will be great. Oh, you should be enlightened, everybody will respect you. Oh, you should be enlightened, then you go to heaven. It creates a desire. Oh my God, I want to be enlightened. I want to be enlightened. That desire is also not right. So this lack of thirst is what is called Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. The word comes from the root Vashikaranam. Vashikaranam means to master. So here what it means is you are mastering the object of senses rather than allowing the object of senses to master you. You are mastering the object of senses, which means you become their master. You don't allow them to become their master. And that is why, as I said to you earlier, it's already a very high state of Vairagyam. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, there are 5 types of Vairagyam presented, of which this Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam becomes the 4th level. So among the 5, Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam is the 4th level, and obviously the 5th level is Para Vairagyam, which we will come to in a moment. But the reason this is important, and I'm actually sharing this, is because yoga is not for everybody. Yoga practice is for everybody, but not the spiritual path of yoga. The spiritual path of yoga is only for those who are willing to step up their game and practice at a higher level. That's why the lower level practice of Vairagyam is the 4th level of Vairagyam according to Bhagavad Gita. Whereas the teaching of Bhagavad Gita, especially in this chapter, the 2nd chapter, is for the common public as well. And therefore, Krishna is very gracefully presenting 5 different levels of Vairagyam, of which Vashikara is the 4th and Paravairagyam is the 5th. Let's look at the first 3 levels of Vairagyam. The first level Vairagyam is the lowest level, that is called Eka Indriya Sanya Vairagyam. It's presented in verse 258 of Bhagavad Gita. Yada samharate chayam Kurmonganiva sarvashah indriyarthebhyur indriyarthebhyah tasya prajna pratishthitam. Krishna is saying, just like a tortoise is withdrawing its limbs when it sees danger, the person who is withdrawing their senses when they see danger, which is the sense objects, that is called Eka Indriya Sanya Vairagyam. You withdraw your senses. That means basically when you see sensory objects, you run in the other direction. Now, obviously, this is not at all any mastery. It's just running away from the object. But in the beginning level, that is what works. Like, for example, people who are trying to come out of alcoholic addiction. Now, firstly, they have to avoid places where alcohol is available because they are weak. The moment they see it, they'll grab. So just like the tortoise is withdrawing its limbs, they have to avoid places where alcohol is available. When they see an alcohol, they have to run away in the other direction. No? So this is the lowest level of Vairagyam. But it's still Vairagyam because you are still conscious that this is a danger and that you have to run away from it. The next level of Vairagyam, that is called Vyatireka Samya Vairagyam, presented in verse 252. Yas sarvanabhisneha tat tat prapya shubhashubham nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna pratisthita. A person who is not attached to success or failure, shubha ashubham, when things go in a good way, they don't react. When things don't go in a bad way, they don't react. They are neither excited nor angry when things go their way or things don't go their way. That is the second level of Vairagyam, because this tells us that life is not permanent and we don't have control. So in a certain way, we are detached. Okay, we win some, we lose some. One day we may win a game, another day we may lose a game. That's all right. One day we may gain something, another day we may lose something. That's all right. So we don't get excited because we gain something. We don't get agitated because we lose something, because that means we are attached to an outcome. That attachment to an outcome we are letting go. That attachment to an outcome we are letting go. So that's the second level of Vairagyam, that is called Vyatireka Sanya Vairagyam. The third level of Vairagyam is presented in verse number 256. Dukkheshvanu anudvigna manaha sukeshu vigataspruhaha vita raga bhaya krodha stitadhir vinimuchyate. Even when there is dukkha, suffering that is happening, our mind is not disturbed. Anudvigna manaha. We are not affected by dukkha. Sukheshu vigataspruhaha. We are not also affected by sukha, comforts or good things that are happening. It's very similar to the previous one, but there is one more extra dimension. Vita raga bhayaha krodaha. We are also letting go. We have had the capacity to let go. Desire, raga, bhaya, fear, krodha, anger. When we are able to let go these three evils, desire, fear, and anger, that's the third level of Vairagyam, that is called Yatamana Sanya Vairagyam. The word Yatamana comes from Yatati, to make an effort. So already it's a high level of Vairagyam. So it goes in that hierarchy. Then obviously the fourth level is the Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam, that we have just talked about in terms of Patanjali's philosophy, which is a very high state. But like I said, the spiritual journey of yoga is not for everybody. This is the problem in the modern era, where yoga has been made more dumb by making it very common and public. Everybody is now a yoga acharya today. Everybody is a yogi today. That's a bit strange, because that's not really what yoga is about. And these people who call themselves that, they do not have even the first level of Vairagyam, let alone the third or the fourth level of Vairagyam, which is at the minimum that is required to be in a spiritual path. However, we can rejoice that they are probably beginners of yoga, but not, unfortunately, they call themselves yoga acharya. They probably should call themselves something else. Yoga arambhakaha, beginners of yoga, will be more suitable. The fifth level of Vairagyam is very, very high, and it's not easy at all. So what Patanjali is saying is, in the fifth level of Vairagyam, before we go to fifth level, I want to share one more sentence. That is a very important sentence about the Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam from the commentary of my grandfather called Yogavalli, where he is saying this Vashikara Sanya Vairagyasya Akaraha. What are the signs that somebody is in the Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam? It's a self-swadhyaya for us. Naham bhunje drishta anushravikamscha vishayane na pashyami na yami tat samipam na smarami cha. It's a way to tell ourselves, we have to tell ourselves, okay, I am not going to perceive, I'm not going to consume these objects, nor am I going to take an effort to go near them, nor am I going to remember and constantly desire them. Oh, I wish I had this. Oh, I wish. Even though you don't have that ice cream, if you keep thinking, oh, I wish I had that ice cream, oh, I wish I had that ice cream, then you are still not in the absence of thirst. So it's not just lack of consumption, but it's lack of even the desire for consumption, and that is what is the Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. Paravairagyam is presented as Tatparam Purushakyatehe Gunavaitrishyam in the Sutra 116. See, even though we may have a very high level of Vairagyam, unfortunately, our human existence has a small problem, which is a big problem. That big problem is that we are under the influence of the gunas. We are constantly dominated by the gunas. Sometimes the vata is dominant, sometimes the pitta is dominant, sometimes the kapha is dominant. In another language, sometimes the sattva is dominant, sometimes the rajas is dominant, sometimes the tamas is dominant. Now, sometimes what happens is, when even though we have a decision not to engage in certain objects that are tempting, somehow when the gunas change, the gunas make you consume those objects. When rajas and tamas become dominant, immediately you are forcing your, without your knowledge, you are moving towards those objects of the senses. And that is the big problem. So even though you may have Vashikara Samya Vairagyam, the gunas may operate, and time to time you are misled into the wrong path, and then you immediately you fall. And the fall is quicker than the gains that you have made through effort and detachment. So that's why we need to be careful, and that's why Patanjali is saying, when you have mastered the gunas, then Paravairagya happens. Now for that, to mastery of the gunas, he is using a word Tat Param in a very interesting way. When we connect to the highest, that means when we connect to the divine, then we have the highest detachment possibility. If we don't connect to the divine, then we do not have the possibility to be in that state because only the divine can help us overcome the gunas. That's why even in alcoholic recovery program, when you look at the 12-step program, for example, there's always a connection to the divine or some form of spiritual connection that is emphasized as one of the steps in order for us to disconnect from the temptation of alcohol. And the same with any other form of recovery program, drug addiction or other forms as well. The same thing is emphasized. So there is a divine connection that is necessary, because we will not have that strength to overcome the gunas on our own. And that's why this is the highest Vairagyam. And this Vairagyam is not easy for many people. And connection to divine does not mean that you need to have blind belief. There has to be faith, which is very different than blind belief. If you want to know what is faith and Shraddha, you can go back a couple of months in our monthly meeting. We talked about Shraddha in a previous meeting. If you've forgotten about it, you can remind yourself of this. Shraddha or faith is very important. It cannot be blind belief. It has to be faith-based. And it's a connection rather than an attachment to the divine. Because sometimes if you get attached to the divine, that itself becomes a raga, not a vairagya. And the topic of vairagya comes many times in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and its application is coming in many times as well. So, for example, as I said, Patanjali already presents in the first chapter that Abhyasa and Vairagya are essential to reach Nirodha, Chittavritti Nirodha. And in this context, in a commentary to Sutra 3.9, where the Patanjali is talking about the two types of state we are existing in, Vyuthana Samskara and Nirodha Samskara. Vyuthana Samskara, what I would call as a restless state, and Nirodha Samskara, what I would call a restful state. Acharya Krishnamacharya in his commentary in the Yogavalli says that Vyuthana Samskara, the restless state, is dominant because of raga, attachment. And Nirodha Samskara, the restful state, dominates because is dominating because of Vairagya. And this is very, very important because Vairagyam is the key to many of our progresses. And we need to sometimes have Vairagyam from Abhyasa itself. A lot of people start to become attached to their practices even and continue to practice some things even though it is not appropriate. And that cases, even the practice becomes an obstacle, or an attachment to the practice becomes an obstacle. So this is why Vairagyam is presented in different moments. And even later, toward the end of the 4th chapter, Patanjali is saying, Tad Vairagyad api dosha bijakshaye kaivalyam. The liberation that we are searching is actually coming from detachment at the highest level. Patanjali says that as we progress in the spiritual path, many powers will happen. And he talks about this in more than one occasion. In 337, he talks about it. Te samadha upasargaha vyuthane siddhayaha. In 335 and 336, he says how as we progress in our path and when we realize the true purpose of our life, there are also some powers that come. Pratibha, Shravana, Vedana, Adarsha, Aswada, Varta, Jayante. Some powers arise. Now, even those powers that arise, they can become seductions. And therefore, he says in the very next sutra in 337, Tat te samadha upasargaha yuthane siddhayaha. Those powers are considered as obstacles for those seeking liberation, whereas it is considered as great powers for those who are just at the lower level. Those who are at the lower level, at the highest level, means because at that stage, you are not really at a lower level. You are actually at a very high level. However, even there, you are having to let go these powers, otherwise you fall into a trap. Similarly, toward the end of the third chapter, 350, tat vairagyad api dosha bijakshaye kaivalyam. Sattva, in the previous sutra, he says Sattva Purusha Anyata Khyati Matrasya Sarva Bhava Adhishthatritvam Sarvajnatritvancha. As you progress, you gain mastery over everything. You have great knowledge, you have great wisdom, and you have mastery over all the states of existence in your life. Still, you have to let go that, because if that becomes an attachment, you will fall, you won't be liberated. So even at that level, Vairagya is what leads you to liberation. So that's why Vairagyam is an essential concept. Now, I certainly, it won't be fair on me if I say, oh, it's difficult and you can't do anything about it because it's for advanced people only. We need to start somewhere. So that's why I'd like for you to reflect on certain ideas that we can start practicing Vairagyam at a very simple level wherever we are, and see how this helps you in your progression. But for this, you have to put it into practice. It just cannot be a theory. So the first thing, which is a teaching from our Upanishad, Neti Neti, that concept of impermanence. Start looking at yourself or ourselves from the span of time. I mean, even though we may live 100 years, that's nothing compared to the age of this world, the age of this universe. Just to give you a simple statistic, I just read a few months ago, a very fascinating concept that we are more closer to the Queen Cleopatra of Egypt than the first pharaoh. Imagine that, how insignificant we are in time. So when we talk about this principle of impermanence, when we start reflecting about this, then we start wondering, what the hell are we making such a big fuss about all these small things that we are attached to? Let it go, let it go. And when it comes to objects, relationship with objects, this is something that we all cannot run away from, because objects are a very big part of our life. Start to enjoy an object rather than just consume an object. Stay with the object with full attention, appreciate it. Don't just consume, like eating as you walk out. Enjoy the food that you eat with fully being present. When you're in a conversation with person, stay with them fully as much as possible. In this way, when you start doing that, you will see that the number of things you want to enjoy will reduce, because you can't have time to enjoy everything. And then you will start to see how many objects you are consuming because of the fear of missing out, rather than actually a genuine interest in the object. So this will shift your relationship. Another thing which we talk about in Vedic tradition is, which is also similarly in some other traditions coming from India, observe the desire, but don't act on it. The same with anger and things like that. Observe the anger, but don't act on it. So in a certain way, you're being fully present with your emotions, your desires, because desire is an emotion, right? But then don't act on it, because the moment you stop acting on it, that's a lower level practice. But once you start doing that as a regular practice, you will start seeing that the desire itself will change, because you're not acting on it anymore. Another way to practice Vairagya is seva, do service to others, because then you start seeing that it's not always about your enjoyment, because there are less privileged people, and when you start doing that, you start to see how privileged you are, and then your relationship with things may actually change. And this will slowly bring to you to another state of what we call simplifying life. You start to simplify life and have a minimalistic approach, because the more objects you have, the more problems you have actually. And you have to maintain all of that, right? So it creates more problems. So the moment you start serving others, especially underprivileged people in many different ways, not just poor people, but also underprivileged in other capacities like mentally handicapped people and things like that, you start to see how privileged and lucky we are. Another practice of is swadhyaya, study of sacred scriptures. Like every scripture you study, like whether it's Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutra of Patanjali or anything else like Buddhist scriptures or other scriptures from ancient times, you will always see how they have dealt with this topic of desire being the work of the devil, the dark side. And therefore, it may give you slight strength when you start doing swadhyaya, study of sacred scriptures, to help you with the idea of what is not uh, uh, important and what is important. And satsanga, a community where you can practice sat, you can practice the reality, the truth, where you are with genuine people, will also help in developing vairagyam, because satsanga will not let you get deviated into these objects of desire. Satsanga is not a community that actually gives you a green stamp for whatever you do. Actually calling out you when you make mistakes and draw you back into the right path, that is satsanga. So when you can create that sangha where satya can be practiced, then that also can give you great strength to have vairagya. And last but not the least, my personal favorite is the practice of santosha. One of the great lessons I have learned myself, and of course, this is a reconfirmation of what Patanjali says, but only when you practice, you learn, is what makes a person genuinely happy is not what objects you have, but rather santosha. It's the practice of contentment. So if you can do something like in the morning, start to practice 5-10 minutes of quiet meditation, of gratitude and santosha, contentment of all the good things you have. Just make a list. You will start seeing how you will slowly develop vairagya as well. And this is very, very powerful. And if you can do it as a daily practice with the feeling rather than just as an intellectual exercise, but you have to actually feel gratitude, you have to feel content, then it really changes you in various levels. It's just phenomenal how this practice helps. And so this is what I want to say. And one last clarification I want to give, because this is something I actually feel is very, very important, especially at a psychological and emotional level. A lot of people think that vairagya means forgetting some memories, forgetting some things from the past. Especially when we talk about healing, a lot of people don't want to remember things from the past, don't want to go back and address the dark things from the past. So my fundamental belief is that it's not about not remembering. Actually, we should not forget, but rather we must remember without drowning. And this is very, very important. You must remember without drowning. That's when you have developed vairagya. You can go back to that same memory, but not collapse from that experience. That is when you have achieved vashikara sanya vairagyam, at least the fourth level, and then you are in the good path for the spiritual journey. So this, my dear friends, is some very simple ideas on the topic of Vairagya, and I'm very happy to share this with you, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Namaste. We will end with a small chant. Om. क्षोणीकोणशतांशपालनकला दुर्वारगर्वानला क्षोभ्यक्षुद्रनरेन्द्रचाटुरचना धन्यान्न मन्यामहे देवं सेवितुमेव निश्चिनुमहे योऽसौ दयाळुः पुरा धानामुष्टिमुचे कुचेलमुनये दत्ते स्म वित्तेशताम् शिलङ्किमनलं भवेदनलमोदरं बाधितुम् पयप्रसृतिपूरकं किमुनधारकं सारसम् अयत्नमलमल्लकं पथि पटच्चरं कच्चरम् भजन्ति विबुधा मुदा ह्यहः कुक्षितः ज्वलतु जलधि क्रीडत्कृपीड भवप्रभा प्रतिभटपटुज्ज्वाला मालाकुलो जठरानलः तृणमपि वयं सायं सम्फुल्लमल्लिमतल्लिका परिमलमुचा वाचा याचामहेन महेश्वरान् दुरेश्वरद्वारबहिर्वितर्दिका दुरासिकायै रचितोऽयमञ्जलिः यदञ्जनाभन्निरपायमस्ति मे धनञ्जयस्यन्दनभूषणं धनम् शरीरपतनावधे प्रभुनिषेवणापादनात् अबिन्धन धनञ्जय प्रशमदं धनन्दन्धनम् धनञ्जय विवर्धिनं धनमुदूढ गोवर्धनम् सुसाधनमबाधनं सुमनसां समाराधनम् नास्ति पित्रार्जितं किञ्चित् न मया किञ्चिदार्जितम् अस्ति मे हस्तिशैलाग्रे वस्तुपैतामहं धनम् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. This is a chant titled Vairagya Panchakam, a chant composed by Sri Vedanta Deshika, one of my ancestors, on the topic of Vairagya. Namaste, dear friends. Namaste.